Go take the video. Take that phone away.
No. Holy. That extraordinary video taken by a passenger just moments after the crash. In these photos, parts of the plane can be seen lying not far from where the fuselage came to a stop. 80 passengers and crew were on board, 15 of them injured, with 3 airlifted to hospital. But incredibly, no one was killed. Hi, I'm Ian Hannamansing in Vancouver. We have live breaking news coverage this hour on CBC News Network. My colleague Tricia Kindleman is on this story and joins us now live from Pearson. Officials held a short update not long ago. What did we learn from that, Tricia?
Well, yeah, Ian, a few new details coming out of that. We can tell you that the airport is starting to return to semi-normal operations. So what we learned in that update from the airport CEO was that there are still 2 runways that are closed. Now, those are both involved and will be part of the investigation into this incident at Pearson earlier today. So they have said that they do expect those 2 runways to stay closed. Could be a little while until that investigation really gets to the heart of the matter, but we also did get a bit of an update on the injury numbers. Now, we had heard a few different numbers throughout the day. At one point, we had heard 15, then we had heard 18. What we can tell you now, Ian, is that we have confirmed with the Peel paramedics as well that there was 17 passengers. That was also the number that the airport CEO told us in that update as well. So we have reached out, done some cross-referencing there, and we can confirm that there are 17 passengers who were injured, 3 of them critical. One child was involved in that incident as well, transported via air ambulance to Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. And then we know that the other 2 people who were injured, they were described as critical and serious. But what I can say for all 3 of those passengers, very serious injuries from what we understand, but not believed to be life-threatening. So we also saw those chaotic moments. I heard it here. I think, you know, as I've been running around down here at the airport and nearby, I haven't really had a chance to soak in all of that. So it's really, really just harrowing to hear the moments of that, those passengers having to make that exit from that plane. The airport CEO did go into more detail about what that emergency response looked like. Here's what she had to say.
Airport emergency workers mounted a textbook response, reaching the site within minutes and quickly evacuating the passengers. We stood up our emergency operations center with Delta Airlines and representatives from fire, police, paramedics, security, and our federal agency partners.
So right now we are at the Greater Toronto Airport Authority Administration Building. That's where we had that first update. We are expecting Pearson's fire chief to make his way down here to give us a bit more information on exactly what that emergency response looked like and some of the challenges that they were facing.
And when that chief starts to talk, we're going to put that live on the air. Tricia, tell us more, though, about what it was like when you got to Pearson shortly after the crash, because all of us across the country, as we saw this news, as we saw the pictures on our phone, it was astounding. Many of us have been to Pearson many times. We know, a bustling, busy airport, busiest one in the country. But tell us more about what it was like there when you got there.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's always a busy, bustling place, but much more busy, a little less bustling at that point when I arrived this afternoon. It was about an hour or so after the crash had happened, and there was just a lot of people kind of sitting in the terminal, obviously scrolling their phones, making their phone calls. I, was wandering through there, definitely heard those speaker phones. With our call volume is higher than normal, so people were trying to rebook their flights. I will say, though, everyone was, ready to be patient and see how the day unfolded. I think there was a lot of nervousness too in those passengers when you're getting ready to take a flight. The last thing you want to hear is of an incident happening at the airport that you're waiting to depart from. So overall, I'd say they were startled by the news, but they were willing to wait and see how it unfolded, and definitely some concerns for the safety of those passengers and crew that were involved in that incident. But also, people were definitely not happy with the delays that they were facing, but they, again, understood that safety is a huge priority, especially when it comes to air travel.
It's been really nice having your updates on News Network through the afternoon, and I know you'll tell us as soon as you see the airport fire chief there. Thanks, Tricia.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian.
Oh my God, I'm at Pearson right now. This plane just went down. The plane just went down.
Well, there's lots of video of this incident, and there, of course, you can see smoke rising from the Delta Airlines plane that had crashed and had flipped over on the runway. As far Al Nasser shot that video, he saw the crash, filmed the incident from a parking lot across the street, and he joins us now from Mississauga, Ontario. Rarely, as far, do we get a chance to talk to eyewitnesses that not only were near the incident, but also had a really close eye on it, as you did. You are a plane spotter. Describe for us exactly what you saw.
Yeah, it was just a completely surreal experience. You know, I've been an aviation enthusiast for over a decade, and you know, today just being a day off, I went to the airport, just kind of like wanted to just kind of, you know, hang out there for a bit, and I'm just, you know, in my car and just you know, looking at all these planes landing, just kind of a business as usual, you know, and then I saw the Delta land perfectly normally, and next thing I know, it's all of a sudden, like literally maybe a second before touching down, it just kind of, you know, tipped a little bit, and then I'm like, oh, geez, why is it tipping so much, right? And then all of a sudden it just landed on one of the engines, and the next thing I knew, it was on fire, and then this crazy amount of smoke, and you know, it's just a really surreal experience, and I was just in shock, and I was like, you know, did I just see what I just saw, right? So yeah, it was just unbelievable. I never thought I would experience something like this with my own eyes at Pearson.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to various airports, including here in Vancouver, watching planes take off and land, and I can't imagine what it would be like to have an incident like this happen, especially with absolutely no warning. So, I mean, again, it's so interesting to talk to eyewitness. So describe it for us. So the plane is landing, and then everything looked normal until just before it touched the runway?
Yeah, so from what I saw, the plane was landing just normal, like as if all the other planes were landing. You know, everything seemed like it was checked out, and you know, everything was balanced. And literally, when the plane was at the premises, like within the Pearson's fence, right? Just, I would say, my math is not the best, but I would say maybe like less than 50 feet above ground. Mm-hmm. It just, you know, tilted to the right. So the right engine was way down, and then the left engine was still kind of in the constant position. And then the next thing I knew, I questioned myself right away. Why did it tilt so much? And then the next thing I knew, within the next nanosecond, that right side of the plane is what hit the ground, the runway, and it was all fire and you know, unbelievable amount of smoke. I witnessed all of that, and you know, it took me a while I was so like out of it. I was so shocked. It took me a while to actually get my phone out and try to get everything on the video.
So I don't know how much you would have been able to actually see, given that there was smoke, and also just trying to process what you saw. But
yeah,
did the wing? Did you see the wing break off? Did you see the plane then just kind of slide forward, or did it catapult? I mean, how did it end up turning upside down?
Yeah, and that's a question I actually have as well. So, you know, the plane is coming from so far, right? So I always position my car in a way that I can see the planes coming like a very, very long distance, and then when they come towards the runway, I can see the whole action, right? So literally about 30 seconds of action I can see. So the whole way I saw the plane perfectly normal, perfectly like no issues whatsoever, completely balanced, and you know, and I could not imagine that something like that would happen. And then, you know, I've been thinking all this time, it's been what, like 6 hours or so. Mm-hmm. I'm still thinking, how could it possibly like just tilt so abruptly and so sharply, literally like, you know, just feet away from touching down. And then, you know, it just like, I would say everything just happened within maybe a second. You know, it was just so quickly. And then I was just shocked. I was like, okay, that happened too quickly. And then, of course, because there was no room, and I could imagine nobody prepared for that. So, of course, there was no time to react, and the plane just landed on that side. And then all I saw was the right side of the plane, which is the right engine, go on fire. So the fire I saw, and then all the smoke that followed right away, and because of the smoke, I could not actually see anything else afterwards.
Right.
So from what I saw is where the plane landed and where the final scene was, where the plane stopped. So what I could not see is, did it skid down rolling, or flipping, or it's just too much smoke for me to just try to figure it out.
Yeah, as for you'll want to listen, because we to the rest of the show, because we have a couple of people, well, a few people with aviation expertise, including very next guest is a pilot. But before I get to him, I have one more question for you. Again, as an eyewitness, can you remember how long was it before the fire trucks got on the scene?
That is actually a very question you asked me. A very good question you asked me. That is a question that actually made me call 911. So, the incident happens. I saw the plane kind of go like this, then it, crashes, and then I just try to grab my phone, and my phone was almost about to fall down in my car floor. I was just so shocked. So, anyways, I come out of the car and I just run towards the fence. I'm just on Airport Road, and I'm trying to walk as far as I could and trying to figure out what just happened. And the biggest thought I had in my mind is, I really, really hope, given the impact of the accident, I really, really pray that there are survivors. And that's the best thing that came out of today, is that, not a single fatality. So that's settled, thank God. So the other thing that came to my mind is, how do people, or how does anyone find out that this happened? Because the plane is now crashed. Are the communication systems working anymore? That was the second question I had. So I waited for maybe 10, 15 seconds, and I'm thinking, you know what? Just because the plane is not functioning anymore, maybe there's no more communication, maybe I should do something about it. So that's when I called 911, and they did tell me that, yeah, there are actually fire trucks on the way. So they basically, while I was on the phone with 911, with the operator, I did actually saw a couple of fire trucks making their way. So the operator did assure me that, yeah, they are taken care, and the situation is being dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, super quick response, and there are a lot of extraordinary things that happened that probably contributed to the fact that no one was killed in this crash. Asfar Al-Nasser, thank you very much for giving us that eyewitness account. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We have live coverage this hour on CBC News Network of that Delta crash at Pearson International. And let's bring in Brodie Sampson, a pilot who has flown in and out of Pearson Airport many times. He joins us from Hansport, Nova Scotia. So I'm sure you've seen the video. You've seen the still pictures of this plane flipped upside down at an airport that you know so well. From a pilot's perspective, what sort of questions do you have?
Well, Ian, thanks very much for having me on. There's a couple different things that I want to touch base on, but I think the underlying concern here is obviously the weather conditions. So there was a lot of snow accumulating on the runway, so obviously the runways were contaminated. Canada uses a different methodology to determine runway friction indexes, which is what pilot uses in the air to determine whether or not the runway is suitable to land on. It's very different than what they use in the States. Ultimately, you end at the same mark, but you have a different way of getting there. So these pilots are doing calculations in the flight, and on this particular flight, a short distance to Toronto, less than an hour flight. They're trying to do these calculations, which are different than what you would see in the United States. Canada uses something called the CFRI, the Canadian Runway Friction Index, CRFI, excuse me. So they use a different method to arrive at these calculations, which help us determine how long of a runway distance we need to land and whether or not the airplane is even fit to land. So this is something that the pilots would have been doing prior to landing. This is something that I've done many times, flying in and out of Toronto. There was also the crosswind component. Looks like it was about 30 to 40 degrees off the runway. So that's also something that the pilots would have been contending with during the approach and landing sequence.
Yeah, so you have you know, a normal landing, which already is complex enough, and then you have these at least two additional variables. So one of them is the friction of the runway. We know there's been a lot of snow at Pearson over the last couple of days, I guess, and so presumably that could have affected, maybe did affect the friction. Then you have the crosswinds, so not only the magnitude of the winds, and we were told gusting up to, I think, 35 knots maybe is the number that I saw, and also the angle that those crosswinds were at. I don't know if you've seen those numbers. Oh, well, there we go. Yeah, winds gusting to 35 knots from 270 degrees. That, along with the snow on the runway, does that raise flags for you?
Not necessarily, no, Ian, although it is a great question. During every flight, you know, pilots are constantly evaluating the level of risk. So you have the crosswind component to this flight, that adds a layer of risk. You have the compacted snow on the runway, that adds another level of risk. So we're constantly extrapolating the data that we're given and using that to apply our own safety measures to help, you know, enhance the safety level of the flight. Those numbers in particular don't scare me. Of course, you know, I don't know what the runway looked like. I don't know what the index level was, but you know, those crosswind numbers aren't something that a CRJ 900 would typically shy away from on a dry runway.
So we had an eyewitness on just before you, and all of us, you know, have imperfect memories of what we see, especially when it's something shocking. But he was watching pretty closely, and he is a hobbyist who's a plane spotter. And I don't know if you heard him, but he said everything looked fine on the descent to his eye, and then he said about 50 feet before above the runway, all of a sudden the plane kind of tilted, and I think he said the right side went down, the engine got really close to the runway, and then there was smoke, and he couldn't see exactly what happened afterwards. If that recollection is correct, what does that tell you, if anything?
Well, I think there's the big component here is the gust factor. So consistent winds, you know, the airplane's on a crab angle, landing on the runway, and then if you get a gust at the last minute, you know, 10, 20, 30 feet above the air, you have to apply aileron correction to account for that gust. So it's possible that they were, you know, using the aileron to correct for the gust factor. It could have been a late gust. Yep. It's really too early to be able to tell. But I will tell you, Ian, all of the control towers in airports have cameras. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we were able to actually watch this whole sequence of events unfold. So also with the NTSB on their way, they'll also be able to investigate to determine what exactly did happen. But it's not unusual to see a wing drop in gusty conditions like that when pilots are fighting, so to speak, the crosswinds.
And Brody, one last question for you. Everybody here survived. This plane flipped upside down. There clearly was fire. The firefighters got there really quickly, but everybody survived, which for me, as I'm not a pilot, but it seems like an extraordinary outcome and says a lot about safety protocols and emergency response. But again, from your pilot's perspective, what's your view of that?
Yeah, great question, Ian. So just looking at the aircraft, you know, it's obviously in rough condition. The Department of Transportation defines an aviation crash as a hull loss or loss of life. And in this case, we can say with confidence that there is a hull loss. They won't be able to reuse the aircraft. So by every standard, it is a crash. And, you know, typically when you see wing sheared and things of that nature, there is loss of life. And we're so fortunate to be having this conversation and have everyone, as far as we know, you know, still be alive. It's also quite remarkable and noteworthy that the airplane didn't catch fire. Obviously, the wings host a large amount of fuel, also a lot of electronics. And when the wing was shed off, you know, it's a miracle that there wasn't sparks or fuel combustion, you know, because they would have had several thousand pounds worth of fuel on board. So it's quite frankly a miracle that everyone's alive.
It is fantastic to have your perspective as a pilot. Brody, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me, Ian. Take care.
All right, let's take you to Pearson International now, where Fire Chief Todd Akin is giving an update on the plane crash. Here it is.
Briefing response at the incident that happened here at Toronto Pearson today. Toronto Pearson Fire Chief Todd Akin will speak first, followed by Superintendent Butt, who is with Peel Regional Police. He is the commanding officer of the Airport Division.
Good evening. I'm Todd Akin, Toronto Pearson Fire Chief. The cause of the crash is still under investigation and being led by the Transportation Safety Board. It's not appropriate for us to comment at this time. However, I can speak to you about our Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting Services response. 3 of our stations in the airport operating area responded with 8 aircraft fire and rescue apparatus, plus Mississauga Fire and Emergency Services quickly responded with 6 engines, 2 district chiefs, a command vehicle, and a tanker. Peel Regional Paramedic Services responded with 18 paramedic units. Upon arrival, my team conducted fire suppression. Self-evacuation was already taking place. At this time, we believe all our emergency response went as planned. We will, however, be conducting a review. This is an active investigation. It's very early on. It's really important that we do not speculate. What we can say is the runway was dry and there was no crosswind conditions. We also want to give an update. We can now confirm that 18 injured passengers have been transported to the local area hospitals. We had 1 additional passenger recently transported to a hospital. We will all be supporting the ongoing investigation by the Transportation Safety Board. Thank you to our teams at Mississauga Fire and Emergency Services, Peel Police, and Peel Regional Paramedic Services, and all other responders that responded on the scene. And now we'll be passing it over to Peel Police. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Wahid Butt. I am the Superintendent in charge of the Airport Division, Peel Regional Police. As the police of jurisdiction, we assisted in today's response. We have secured the site and will continue to provide security and offer any assistance needed. We will also like to thank other GTA police services that are assisting us today. Thank you.
Thank you both. There will be no more formal news conferences tonight, but we are scheduled to provide an update tomorrow. We will provide information on that. We will also be posting operational updates on our social medias throughout the night as well. For media who are coming to the airport, we ask that you continue to stage at 311 Convair Drive. Thank you.
So one of the notable things about that news conference, as you would have just seen and heard, is no questions. I just think of all the news conferences I've been to on all kinds of different stories, and you think about the number of hours that have passed since this incident happened, and the fact that a lot of good news came out of this, including the fact that no one was killed. And interesting, and you could hear, I think, the frustration on the part of the reporters who didn't get a chance to ask any follow-up questions. And if I'd been there, one of the questions I would have asked of the fire chief is if I understood correctly. I think he said that the runway was dry and there were no crosswind conditions. And that seems to be different from what people saw and what some people have reported. And even listening to air traffic control, I think we heard controllers tell pilots that there were gusts of up to 35 knots. So we'll continue to look at that, but I believe the fire chief said that the runway was dry, no crosswind conditions, and then if that is the case, it raises questions as to, well, if it wasn't those two things, then what? Let's go to somebody who knows a lot about investigating aviation incidents. David McNair is a former investigator with Canada's Transportation Safety Board. He joins us now from Ottawa. David, what do you make of what we just heard from the fire chief?
Well, I'm not sure about the crosswind part, because you look at the instructions that the pilots had just before landing, the crosswind was about up to 17 knots across the crosswind of about 17 knots. So I'm not sure where that came from. And I think other people look at the weather and the reports indicate there was a crosswind for sure. And it was a gusty crosswind of about 10 knot increments.
One of the things I like is to talk to experts like you, and we talked to a pilot as well just a few minutes ago, not to get the answers about what happened, because of course we don't know. There's a lot of investigating that needs to be done, but to get sort of informed opinions about the kinds of things you'd be looking at. And so for you, with your experience as a TSB investigator, what sort of issues are raised here by what we've seen in terms of the aftermath, at least, of this crash?
Well, I've heard some witness reports that the wing dropped, and that's something that you have to explore. There's several reasons that could account for that. It could be wake turbulence. I don't know if there's another airplane ahead of it, or the airplane flying too slow. There's a lot of reasons that have to be investigated. But as you say, this is very early, and there's a lot of data to be gathered. The flight recorder should have survived and would be very helpful. And when there more videos appear, which I'm sure will happen, there's so many video cameras around that area, we'll probably get a better perspective of the actual dynamics of the accident. But it's also tricky to look at. When you look at the accident site, the airplane is actually turned back towards from whence it came, and that's something that has to be explored. And I think it may have happened towards the end of the trajectory. But in any case, those are the kinds of things you have to look at. Interview the pilots as well and see what they experienced. Interview the passengers. The passengers can also they're very valuable witnesses to say what happened when. There'll be different accounts, but you'll be able to put together something quite good, I think. But in any case, there should be a lot of evidence to solve the problem. But as you mentioned, it's a bit early to speculate exactly what it would be. But there's some sort of performance or some sort of flight dynamic problem that was created that didn't get recovered from.
On our TV screen right now, as you're speaking to us, we're seeing you, but we're also seeing the video of the plane upside down. I haven't seen that before. I can't even, maybe a small plane, but not a larger commercial aircraft at a major airport upside down after a landing. Have you?
Well, if you look back to the Aviation crash at San Francisco, it pivoted around and flew backwards, but ended up again almost in almost a 360 circle. So again, to understand the dynamics, you really have to see it, because like if you look at a car accident, you see all the cars all over, you can't figure out where they were until you gather the evidence. And the same thing for this, until we have evidence to show the dynamics of the flight based on visual and flight recorder data, which will tell you as well, and the pilot experiences and the cockpit voice recorder, all these bits of valuable evidence will put the story together. And of course, that as was mentioned, the runway condition can also be very important. Were there snowbanks on the side of the runway? I don't know, but those are the kinds of things that have led to problems. And the runway, I'm surprised to say here, was dry, because the NOTAMs put out by the airport authorities did not indicate that. As I say, there was a crosswind. So all these things are not things you want to have on a landing. They're manageable. They're certainly manageable. Other aircraft landed. And the trick will be to find out why this one didn't succeed, and what are the factors that didn't succeed, what are the safety deficiencies, and how can those safety deficiencies be fixed. That's what the investigation team will do, and the NTSB and the TSB, I'm confident, will come up with some good answers.
Yeah, and NOTAM, the notice to aviators, and what did that notice say?
Well, it just mentioned there was snow on the runway, and it's a long NOTAM. But it's something that is published to tell pilots what the runway condition is like. I don't believe they put a slippery index on it, but they indicated there was compact snow on the runway, 160 feet wide, and the runway is 200 feet wide. So there was snow on the runway for sure. But again, it's just not a big deal. It's a lot of airplanes land on it. Again, but what was the difference in this flight? And that's what the investigation will uncover.
Yeah, I mean, I keep coming back to that one line, and we didn't get a chance to ask a follow-up question to the airport fire chief, where he said that there wasn't snow on the runway, and also that there weren't crosswinds, and we seem to have indications to the opposite of both of those things. I mean, David, what we do know is that, every other plane landed at Pearson up to that point without incident, and we know this one had a huge incident, so something happened, and something happened that didn't affect the other planes. So yeah, this is what investigators are going to deal with. Your former agency, the Transportation Safety Board, the Canadian agency, takes the lead. This is a U.S.-based airline, Delta, so I guess the NTSB will be involved as well. How does that work?
Well, according to Annex 13 of the International Civil Aviation Organization, the country that operates the airplane, U.S., has a right to participate. Of course, they would. And the TSB and whoever investigates it internationally depends on those other representatives coming from other countries. It's a very important part of the investigation. I think that airplane actually was flown by Endeavour, which is a feeder airline for Delta, and their call sign was Endeavour. And but in any case, the NTSB has a lot of experts, and the TSB has as well. And between them and with the evidence that should be available to them, they should be able to come up with some good answers where the deficiencies were and good fixes to make sure it doesn't happen again.
This may seem like an odd question, David, but I actually think it's interesting to me, and that is relations between Canada and the United States are kind of rocky right now, and a lot of things are changing in the United States under the new president. Did you, in your time with the TSB, ever see politics get in the way of cooperation between the U.S. and the Canadian investigators?
No.
And so you feel pretty confident, do you, that going forward, the two agencies will be able to work together on this without any problems?
I have 100% confidence they will be able to do so, yes.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to ask you one more thing, and that is, I'm not a nervous flyer, but I know a lot of people are at the best of times, and all of a sudden in the space of, 3 weeks, we had the collision at Washington Reagan, we had the medevac plane in Pennsylvania, and now we had this. If you're a nervous flyer, it might be a time where people are even more nervous. What would you say to those who wonder if it's still safe to fly?
Well, there's a lot of statistics out there that say it's a lot safer to fly places than even driving in Ottawa today, where there are snowbanks, slippery roads, perhaps. But in any case, it's always the case that people will be afraid of flying, no matter what happens. Even if there are no accidents, they're just afraid of flying, and that's the way it goes. But I'm not afraid to go. I'd go anywhere, anytime I needed to, and no hesitation. And these are, again, all the accidents you named were different things, obviously, and different reasons, different deficiencies, and it just seems to be bad timing. And of course, there are good things and bad things. The good thing was that everybody seems to have survived this accident, which is a miracle in some ways. The bad things are, it just seems like, particularly for CRJs, there's been hints, well, it's a bad airplane. It's not a bad airplane, it's a good airplane. And it actually proved its strength by the fact that it was able to maintain its integrity in people that survived. But it's just one of those things that sometimes things line up and you can't do much about it and you don't understand it, but they are all different. Everything's different.
And there's a treasure trove of information, of data, of evidence, of eyewitnesses, likely of video, as you pointed out. David, I've read TSB investigation reports in the past. They are thorough and reassuring, and I'm sure that'll be the case here as well. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good night.
David McNair, a former investigator with Canada's Transportation Safety Board. Let's bring in CBC meteorologist Russ Lacate, who is listening into that news conference and also aware of what the runway, or at least what the weather conditions were at the airport. So the fire chief there is saying that the runway was dry, no crosswind conditions. What sort of data have you seen?
Well, so many interesting weather elements involved over the course of the preceding 36 hours at Toronto Pearson, as well as the entire region, Ian. Specifically, we had a lot of heavy snow Saturday night, changing temporarily to sort of an ice pellets mix. There was a very close to that sort of freeze and melt line as the front moved over parts of Lake Ontario. And then, of course, it shifted back to snow and the big wind came in behind that. What we saw earlier today was almost the leading edge of a very shallow layer of Arctic air moving in, a secondary westerly gust, if you will. So as your guest mentioned earlier, the weather conditions at the time of the accident were not bad enough to shut the airport down. I mean, it was windy and there may have been some residual snow on the ground, but those aren't the sorts of things that shut an airport down. But I think the combination of those factors may still have come into play. And the one thing that really stands out to me was we talk about the incident occurring on runway 23, and the orientation of that runway is quite different than the main runways at Pearson. And there was quite a strong crosswind component. We saw 65K gusts over a period of several hours, and specifically right around the time of the accident.
All right, Russ, thank you very much for watching that for us and for the update. Russ Lacate, a CBC meteorologist, here with me in Vancouver. Let's go back to Tricia Kindleman, who is at the news conference. Tricia?
Well, and so again, we seem to be left with more questions than answers. We heard Russ just talking there about the crosswind conditions and some of the really, really strong breezes and winds that were affecting the GTA area this afternoon. I can say we were out and about sort of at the southern end of the airport, just off of the sort of main airport service road for a while this afternoon. We did have the plane in our sights, and it was very, very, very windy. But we did have that update from that fire chief not too long ago. We have a little bit of what he said about those conditions that don't really seem to line up with the things Russ was just saying there. Let's hear from him.
This is an active investigation. It's very early on. It's really important that we do not speculate. What we can say is the runway was dry and there was no crosswind conditions.
So now the fire chief said a few times during his short update that we don't want to speculate, it's too early to speculate, that sort of thing. But I think you probably heard it in the background of that update. Once the Peel police chief also spoke, they made a fairly quick exit, and the group of reporters that are gathered here started to pepper them with questions, because we had the CEO earlier as well, and hers was essentially a prepared statement. We were told that she wasn't going to be taking questions, but sort of the way that update had been set up and structured, there was a number of people with her. It seemed like someone else was going to head up and make some comments, but that didn't happen. So we do know that we're not expecting any more updates from the airport this evening. They said they will continue to post operational updates online, but they did say that they will schedule an update for some point tomorrow. No indication on exactly what that time is. But again, we were given some more information around the numbers that were involved. The fire chief, my apologies, did confirm that there was one additional person who was transported to hospital, again, in addition to that 17 that we've sort of seen this number climb throughout the day. So now our understanding is 18 people were taken to hospital, 3 of them with critical injuries again, but none of them listed or rather, none of them expected to be potentially fatal injuries. So we are hoping to learn more about those details in the coming days as well, Ian.
Okay, Tricia, thank you very much for the update, and you've been giving us great updates on News Network throughout the afternoon and now into the evening. And I should say to those of you who are watching our live coverage here on CBC News Network, we are very mindful of the fact that this investigation is in its very, very early hours. We're certainly not in the business of trying to draw conclusions as to what happened. It's going to take probably a long time before we get there. But we also think that it's reasonable to look at what some of the possible conditions may have been, possible causes may be, and also to try to hear from experts as we have so far in the hour, and we'll continue to hear from those experts to get their perspective on what sorts of things might be going on. So we'll try to get to the bottom of what the conditions were in the airport, if not this hour, then certainly in our continuing coverage here on CBC News. Now, in the aftermath of the incident, one of the areas we're getting some insight from is air traffic control, and listen to some of the radio transmission from the tower at shortly after the crash happened.
Secure, so just let me know what you'd like to do. We just had a crash on runway 23 here.
April, Roger. Yeah, we're discussing with their OTC whether they wanted to redeploy to this crash site or not.
Roger, we're 7105, contact departure 1288.
Roger, 28, we're 7105.
Second Mike Tango Medevac, not sure what the plan is here, just give me a second.
Tower Air Canada 787 short 24 right ready.
Okay, 787 on 4th Street, currently the airport's closed for Flight 1 Medevac, Roger. Juliet and Kilo intersection, you can land there, wind 270-24, gusting 33.
Clear land, Juliet, Kilo, Flight 1 Medevac next.
Flight 1 Medevac, just so you are, there's people outside walking around the aircraft there.
Yeah, we've got it. The aircraft there's upside down and burning.
So that is radio transmissions from air traffic control shortly after the crash, as you could hear. Let's bring in Mark Miller. He's an aviation journalist, and he joins us from Whistler, British Columbia. I'm really struck, Mark, listening to that audio, and this is the case in so many other aviation incidents of how calm and controlled people are. As you heard that, what went through your mind?
I thought it was a remarkable piece of tape. Of course, you saw them directing the fire trucks, the red one, to the scene of the incident. And that helicopter you heard, medevac, they actually directed him, or he asked if he could land next to the crash site and to provide assistance. So I saw some of the video that you guys were showing earlier of a helicopter flying away with patients on board, and I think that was that guy. So they had emergency personnel, they had fire rescue there just immediately, and I thought it was quite remarkable.
Another remarkable thing here is that there was no loss of life in this incident where this plane ended up upside down, and there was clearly fire, at least for a while here. So a lot of things in terms of the emergency response, how quick that was, as it would be at an airport, the integrity of the fuselage of this aircraft, and that obviously the seat belts, the seats all held in place, and how the flight crew would have reacted here. We heard from the fire chief that people were, in his words, self-evacuating. In other words, making their own way out of this aircraft by the time the fire trucks got there. Again, from your perspective, as a person who has been a private pilot for a long time, but also covered aviation, tell me about that part of it, about the kinds of things that likely led to everyone surviving here.
I think I've reported on every plane crash in North America since probably 1990. And this one really reminded me of what happened in Fredericton in 1997 when Air Canada regional jet, almost the same airplane, crashed there and went off the runway. And it was during a very snowy time. I think the snow was about knee deep, might have been hip deep, and the airplane went and bobsledded off into the trees. Nobody was killed, there was no fire. And I wonder if the weather played a role in this. We think, maybe crosswinds may be an issue here, but it being so cold and there being snow on the ground, perhaps that helped reduce some of the issues that could have triggered a fire. We know that there was a bit of a fireball, probably when that wing came off, but there was no fire within the cabin. And the other thing that was just remarkable about this airplane is when you see that video on Instagram, and people evacuating, all the seats are still in place. And this is a result of an FAA mandate in 1998 that all newly designed airplanes had to have 16G seats. So when Bombardier designed this airplane and built it in Mirabel, it had the 16G seats. And so in other accidents, we've seen seats break loose. That traps people. One of the big problems in airplane accidents have a lot of G, is people break their legs as the seats sort of accordion up and then they can't get out of the airplanes. You add fire to that and it's obviously, a very, very bad combination. But this one, no fire, the seats remained intact and people got out of the airplane.
And a reminder, Mark, that it's important to listen to that safety advice that we hear, when you board the plane and before the plane lands, and it's easy to, be looking down at your phone and not paying attention to all of that. But those things matter, and they mattered here. And and another thing that somebody told me a long time ago, sounds kind of silly, but I'll just say it, is wear shoes when you're on the plane, because there was a plane recently in Canada, I think somewhere in the Maritimes, where people ended up having to leave in a hurry in wintry conditions, and some people were just in their socks, not in shoes. And you have to be prepared for ending up on the runway like this.
Yeah, one of the things I always do, and I tell my family to do when we fly commercially, is it's just a little game. We count how many seats away we are to the exit in front. So if we have to crawl on our hands and knees, it's like 4 rows, turn left. I know that's an exit. And then where's the one behind me? 10 rows. And then, so if you're in a situation where you can't see, just play that game next time you're on an airplane. And the other thing, don't take your stuff. If you have to evacuate an airplane, don't go for the laptop in the overhead. Just get out of the airplane. Somebody will buy you a new laptop.
Yeah, and also don't panic, right? Because panic kills. We've heard that a million times. Listen, Mark, one last thing I want to ask you, because I'm not a nervous flyer. It sounds like you're not a nervous flyer, but there are nervous flyers out there. What do you say to them on a night like this?
Well, we have just gone through the safest period of commercial aviation in the history of aviation. We hadn't had an accident for, I can't remember what the exact number is, but there hadn't been a fatal accident for many, 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 many years. And we've had 3 incidents. Interesting enough, all of them were on approach. We had the DC accident. We had this accident, and then the one in Korea. They are not related. There is no connection between these three accidents. So I think it's just bad Las Vegas odds. It's we've gone through a really safe period in aviation, and we've had three incidents. The good news is this one in Toronto, everybody got off the plane with their lives, and I think we have to be really thankful for that.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, that is a headline, right? Is the fact that everyone survived. It is extraordinary, and it's something that we should celebrate. And I hope that soon we'll get a better sense of the factors that contributed to the good news in all of this. Mark, you're a fantastic person to have on a night like this. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Okay, good night, Ian.
If you're just joining us, let's recap our breaking story. The fire chief for Toronto's Pearson Airport says 18 people have been hurt in the Delta Airlines plane crash. He also says the runway was dry. There were no crosswind conditions, though we have seen indications that contradict that. The twin-engine plane was flying in from Minneapolis and landed shortly before 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Canada's Transportation Safety Board will, of course, be leading this investigation. There are some incredible accounts of what happened on board and on the tarmac at Pearson. And Sarah Galashan joins us now to talk more about that. Sarah, as I was just saying to Mark, remarkable that everyone survived this.
Ian, absolutely. And, you know, so much of what we have had today in terms of a visual as to what's happened has been shot on phones that were carried by those passengers who unbelievably were able to exit in many cases on foot, just walking away from that plane against some pretty strong winds and some spray from the water cannons that were there to try and put out what were initially flames. But they were able to walk away, and in many cases they were able to turn around and take some footage of what was an incredible scene, a plane upside down with the wings clipped off, lying there on the tarmac. One of those passengers who posted to social media was an Ashley Zook. She actually posted a series of videos, and if you're looking at that plane, I think there's a lot of people who have looked at it and thought, what would it be like to be on board that plane? And what Ashley Zook did was she shot a series of videos on and then as she exited as well, capturing the moment and her own emotion, and I want to play you what she posted to social media.
Okay, no. Oh, that suck. Get the I was just in a plane crash. Oh my God. I was just in a plane crash.
And no surprise, I mean, you can hear what is clearly, fear and incredible relief in her voice as she is exiting on the tarmac there. Those videos, Ian, have been shared really around the world, reported on by media agencies around the world. I've yet to see an actual interview done with Ashley, but no doubt hearing her account based on what she has captured and posted is going to be something that people will be paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the interesting things about being in the social media world is when stories come out, and tonight it's a good news story. You see all kinds of perspectives of that, and you get a real sense of what it must have been like to be on that tarmac immediately after that crash. What else do you have for us?
Well, so another passenger also on that plane, sitting in row 10, just before the wing on that plane, which did snap off. His name, John Nelson. He has, his was one of the first videos actually that we saw that was posted. He was able to, as he was exiting and walking away from the plane, turn around, take that footage. And that is something that we have been playing, and there has been expert commentary based on that footage as to what may have happened. So he's played a pretty big role in terms of getting this story out. He also has done an interview, and he talks in it about what it was like when on that descent the plane hit the tarmac, and doesn't know, he's not an expert, not what went wrong, but his account of what happened is very interesting. Take a listen to that.
It was just a super hard, like I hit the ground and the plane went sideways, and I believe We skidded like on our side and then flipped over on our back. Where we ended up, there was like a big fireball out this left side of the plane. And when we got finished, it was I was upside down. Everybody else was there as well. Thankfully, everybody was okay. But we tried to get out of there as quickly as possible.
Now, one of the reasons, I mean, obviously you'd want to get out as quickly as possible, but he said he could, and others could, smell the jet fuel. In fact, hours later when he was talking, he said, I can still smell the jet fuel, whether it's on him or whether it's part of that memory that won't likely fade anytime soon. He's still reliving that, and you know, many of the passengers still sort of grouped together as they were being processed, having left that tarmac safely. And some of them, of course, taken to hospital, but others able to talk with one another. And what he talked about also is just the relief that he is feeling. Others sharing in that as well, relief that he survived, that all survived, some injured, but still alive. Ian?
Wow, lots of interesting stuff there. Thank you very much, Sarah.
You bet.
Let's head back inside Pearson International Airport now. That's where CBC's Mark Carcasol is. And Mark, we talked about it, right? The busiest airport in the country on a holiday Monday. This incident clearly created some major travel delays.
Yeah, Ian, and Pearson Airport is busy at the best of times. And walking around the airport now, you wouldn't necessarily know that today was any different from usual, now that there's been a few hours separating us from the time of that accident, a little before 3 p.m. local time. It took a couple hours, but eventually things started ramping up again here at the airport. There's a board behind me. You probably can't see it very well here, but we did take some shots of it. But it says, due to operational reasons, expect delays. And that is the message for everyone coming in here in the departures area in Terminal 3, where I'm standing, certainly. That those operational delays, obviously the plane crash that occurred earlier today, like I said, about a couple hours after that crash occurred, they started bringing in flights and letting flights take off again, ending the ground stoppage that was declared immediately after the crash to allow for an investigation and safety protocols to play out. As far as we know now, one runway is still closed, and officials here with the Greater Toronto Airports Authority are saying it will remain closed probably for a couple days while they do their investigation. The flights are coming in and out, but there are significant delays. The people you see in lineups behind me with their bags and whatnot, these lineups aren't as long as they were even just a couple hours ago, but these are the lucky ones. A lot of these people had flights scheduled for late afternoon, early evening, whose flights were simply delayed. There have been many people whose flights have been canceled until tomorrow or possibly later, and have had to find alternate ways to get around this. Many of those I speak to obviously understand, given the circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that flights have been actually resuming there quicker than I thought they would. You've talked to some of the delayed passengers. What have they been telling you?
Yeah, I just want to mention before I go into that also that airports in Montreal, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Hamilton did take in redirected flights that were ushered away from Pearson Airport and forced to land somewhere else. So that affected traffic throughout the airport as well. As far as the passengers that I've spoken to here, a lot of them are taking it in stride. Again, given the situation that they're going through, they're just happy that there were no fatalities on that flight. I came across Paige as soon as I got to the airport. She was sitting on the floor actually eating dinner, contemplating her next move. She was on the plane ready to go on a flight to Fort Lauderdale when she and her fellow passengers got the bad news.
Things were business as usual until they weren't, and we got word from the pilot that there was some type of a disturbance on a different plane on, I think it was Terminal 1, and we learned throughout the next hour or two being in the taxi plane that there was a serious accident where the plane from Delta was flipped upside down, and it was really unfortunate.
Now, she says that she will find a way to Fort Lauderdale. The airline that she was flying on doesn't have another flight for about 3 days. However, she was able to find a spot on another flight, and she expects to go to Fort Lauderdale tomorrow. As far as what she's going to do tonight, most likely a hotel stay, possibly staying at the airport overnight. She's not even sure if that's allowed. But again, taking it in stride, knowing that it could have been far worse for the people on board. She's just happy that there are no fatalities to report. And obviously that she wasn't on that flight herself. She says her heart goes out to the people that were on that plane.
Yeah, are you doing this live interview on your phone? I think you are, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Can you tell, is there a bad signal? Or?
No, it's great. I just love the fact that you can go to Terminal 3 and hold your phone up and do a live hit and show us what's going on there. I think that's terrific, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The emergency at Pearson having impacts, of course, as you heard, across the country. Travelers being redirected. Flights have been delayed. The CBC's Katie Nicholson is one of those travelers. She's in Cancun right now. And Katie, what are you hearing from people there?
Well, you know, there's all kinds of people had their bags packed. They were ready to go home today. You walk into the lobby of the resort and suddenly they were puzzled. A lot of Canadians have been bracing for travel delays because of weather, and this incident with the Delta flight really caught a lot of people off guard. Essentially what happened was people were just flummoxed. They didn't know where they could go, what to do. I spoke to one couple from Toronto who were actually supposed to be on my flight this evening. And here's a little bit of sort of what was going through their head at the time.
An email that we got, it said that the reason was a flight was delayed due to inclement weather, and then that delayed the next flight. So that was the reason that we were given. We might try and talk to the front desk. We might try and call Air Canada to see what our next steps are, because we haven't been provided with any yet, and we'd kind of like to get home soon.
So I can tell you that Jane and Nelson were able to secure a room for themselves tonight at that resort. They're going to stay there and stay put until they find out what's next from Air Canada, when they can actually take a flight home, and you know whether there's going to be another plane put on tomorrow, another crew, that sort of thing. All of that logistics. They're waiting to hear back from Air Canada, and so am I.
Well, so what have you heard from airlines about this delay?
So essentially people are calling, if they've booked through an agency, they're calling the agencies, the different vacation sort of airline groups, and the advice that people are getting, if you're at the resort that you're at, see if you can book another room. The problem is, this is a high traffic time, Ian. It's President's Day in the US, and it's Family Day in much of Canada, so lots of families have come down here, and so there's not a lot of rooms available. I had to actually book off-site at another hotel. I was able to find a spot. So that's the sort of the quandary a lot of folks are in, even though they're being told, stay where, if you can, stay in the resort that you're at for next night, and just sort of hold tight, hold on to all of your your receipts, that sort of thing, and see if you can claim it back later. And that's really the advice that people are getting here. But I have to tell you, Ian, you know, there's worse places to be stuck than Cancun.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that as I'm looking behind you there, and so we heard from Mark how well, as they should, people are taking these delays at Pearson because they know, you know, what caused it, and they are so happy that you know no one was badly hurt in this, or at least killed. Yes. And I assume that the people you're talking to in Cancun also are taking this fairly well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Canadians were already ready. They were expecting that there might be some sort of weather disruption, right? I mean, it's February in Canada, these things happen. And particularly, I think when people heard the details of what happened at Pearson this afternoon, you know, immediately it was that sense of, oh my goodness, was everybody okay? They wanted to know that there had been no fatalities and sort of what caused it. So, you know, I think people really do consider themselves quite lucky to be here and to be sort of far away from the fray in Pearson right now.
Absolutely. CBC's Katie Nicholson in a hardship posting tonight in Cancun, Mexico. Thank you. Doug Ford addressed the crash on the X, saying, "I'm relieved there are no casualties after the incident at Toronto Pearson. Provincial officials are in contact with the airport and local authorities and will provide any help that is needed." And the Minister of Transport, the federal minister, Anita Anand, has also provided an update on the crash, saying, "I'm closely following the serious incident at Pearson Airport involving Delta Airlines Flight 4819 from Minneapolis. All 80 passengers on board are accounted for. Updates will follow." And as you heard earlier in this hour, the airport had a very brief update from the fire chief and also from the person in charge of policing at the airport, but they didn't take any questions, and there are still some questions to be asked about this. Our coverage will continue here on CBC News Network. I'm Ian Hannamansing in Vancouver. The National is next.
Thanks for joining us. We are following breaking news tonight. At least 3 people seriously injured after a plane flipped over on landing at Toronto's Pearson Airport. One of them, we know, is a child. The images